25 Battle, Part 1. Destiny Cargo Bay 22, 02.2, 7.2020, 1005. La-27 had turned one of the empty cargo bays into his staging ground/command post. Because the bridge's controls were dark and inert, he could not use it as his command post. The problem was that the enemy probably had the means to turn those controls back on, which meant that he had to keep them out of that room. So he had assigned considerable forces to defend it. And then there is the issue of going on the offense. The enemy had set up of the headquarters in the room with the alien ring. And it's a safe bet that they've dug themselves in. He turned to Middle Commander FC 83H, who he had made his second-in-command of the Hal'Iry forces. FC 83H had been making sure that everybody had weapons and setting up defenses for the cargo bays. "How are we doing, Commander?" "All the troops are armed, and we've used the crates to set up barriers, Supreme Commander." "Excellent." La-27 was looking at a map of the alien vessel. "Give the orders to begin, Commander." FC 83H nodded and began giving the troops their marching orders. As La-27 watched them go, a smile grew on his face. Plan B was now in motion. Destiny Control Interface Room 02.2, 7.2020, 1006. The good news was that the control interface room was working again, and the military personnel were hard at work setting up defenses around both it and the gate room. The bad news was that the internal sensors were telling them that not only was the enemy coming, they outnumbered Young and company 7-1. At the moment, Illy and Rush were doing their best to keep the Hal'Iry out of the infirmary and the garden. "We need to retake the bridge," Rush said. "And they know it," Young said. The internal sensors showed multiple fortified positions between the gate room and the bridge, and with their numbers, the Hal'Iry would be able to send in plenty of reinforcements if they attacked those positions. Next to him, Colonel Vale was also studying the enemy positions. It was not going to be easy to win this fight, and they both knew it. USS Prometheus Bridge 02.2, 7.20201009. Mackenzie, Woolsey, and O'Neill had relocated to the Prometheus. Mackenzie had traded his suit for jeans, a white t-shirt, and a bomber jacket that he had inherited from his grandfather. John Alexander Mackenzie had been a pilot during World War II who had fought in the Battle of Britain. "I wonder what Grandpa would say about this whole mess." Courtesy of the alien intervention, this had become an old-fashioned ground battle. Except for the fact that it's happening aboard a spaceship millions of light-years away from Earth. He was working one of the consoles on the bridge when Richard Woolsey walked onto the bridge. "Any news from the Epsilon site?" "Colonel Telford has sent teams to secure both Spira and Chaser. He's still working on getting people to Destiny," Woolsey said. Mackenzie nodded. There was no way that the Primians would be able to field a big enough force in time to help Colonel Young and his crew. It was at times like this that he missed being in the Navy. "Those days are gone, Robert. The buck stops at you now." It made him feel Shakespearean. Heavy hangs the head that wears the crown. Of course, he knew that the real people carrying the weight right now were Colonel Everett Young and Colonel Mark Vale. And that Vale was his fault. After all, it had been Mackenzie who had offered him the job of Nova Roma Expedition Commander. No way back now. He counted to 4, then went back to work. Destiny Corridor 02.2, 7.2020, 1014. Lieutenant Matthew Scott fired his weapon and watched as the Hal'Iry soldier dropped. He was leading a team of defenders who were firing short bursts as they tried to hold the corridor. They had taken out the first wave of attackers with grenades connected to tripwires. The colonel better come up with a plan, or this is not going to end well. Before he could ponder it further, the Hal'Iry rushed forward en masse. Scott and his team opened fire, but it was not enough. He watched in horror as Sergeant Greer took one of the energy bolts, followed by Corporal Barnes and Private Becker. No. Scott fired his weapon as he rushed towards the three of them, taking down two more Hal'Iry soldiers. Fortunately, Barnes and Becker had been shot in the leg. Greer, however, had not been so lucky. He had been shot near his left kidney. But Greer being Greer, that didn't keep him from shooting at the bad guys. "Retreat," Scott ordered. Scott and Vanessa James provided cover fire, while the rest of the team got the wounded out of dodge. And then more Hal'Iry came rushing towards them, and everything really went to hell. Destiny Control Interface Room 02.2, 7.2020, 1020. Things had gone to pieces. The civilians were trapped, and the enemy was pushing them back fast, and the wounded were piling up in the gate room. TJ, Bennett, and Vilazzo were doing their best, but they lacked the supplies and equipment they needed. Young was firing his weapon and doing his best to hold the control interface room. He had just shot one of the Hal'Iry soldiers when there was a beep. Rush had managed to get the countdown clocks back online. 11 minutes. Destiny had dropped out of FTL when the Hal'Iry had dialed in. But with the wormhole disconnected by the new Assurans, the ship had begun doing the math on a new FTL jump. They simply hadn't been able to see it until now. Great, just great. Then an idea formed in his head. He turned to Colonel Vale, who was preparing a surprise of his own for the Hal'Iry. "I have an idea, but I need Rush to set it up. How is Maggie coming along?" "Ready to raise some hell," Vale began. "Go." Young ran for the gate room, while Vale and Coulson used Maggie to unleash a rain of bullets. Maggie was a premium copy of a Mark 1.303 Vickers machine gun. Earth considered these weapons obsolete, but the Premium Senate had not been so picky. So they had provided the Destiny Expedition with two of these weapons. The other weapon had been nicknamed Powley and had been set up to cover the Stargate, just in case the Hal'Iry tried to dial in again. Young found Rush at the Kino console and began explaining what he had in mind. Destiny Cargo Bay 22, 02.2, 7.2020, 1020. La 27 was pleased with their progress. They had the enemy pinned in a single section. If only I had another canister of poison gas, I could end this now. Alas, he lacked said supply. That was when there was a beep and a display above one of the doors activated. What does that mean? It appeared to be a countdown. But because they could not read the alien language, there was no way for them to know how much time they had left. Nor did they know what would happen once said countdown reached 0. He grabbed his radio. La 27 to FC 83H. Equals // equals FC 83H here, Commander. Equals / equals. Did you see the countdown activate? Equals / equals yes, Supreme Commander. Equals / equals. We need to speed up the assault, La 27 began. Use the Markroman 3 grenades right away. Equals / equals right away, Supreme Commander. Equals / equals FC 83H said. Equals / equals out. Equals / equals. The radio went silent, and soon afterwards, Supreme Commander La 27 heard a series of loud pulses echoing through the massive alien vessel. Several minutes later, the radio came back on and he got a report on their progress. About time. But it was not what he was expecting. Destiny Corridor 02.2, 7.2020, 1021. Nikita Aronov had just lost his lunch. The Hal'Iry had tried to use some kind of energy grenades against them, injuring 4 of members of his team. But the effect had been even worse for the attackers. Above the floor was 5 centimeters worth of dense mist, which was the residue of the Hal'Iry poison gas. It had not been affected by stray shots from the energy weapons, but the energy grenades had a higher output. As a result, the grenade had caused a reaction with the residue. The defenders had been protected by their SG uniforms and civilian clothes, and the fact that they lacked tails. As for Hal'Iry, they had not been so lucky. Nikita had watched in horror as the discharge traveled up their tails and they burst into flames. In a hellish moment, over a dozen Hal'Iry troopers had died horribly. As soon as the smoke had cleared, Aronov had nearly dropped his weapon before throwing up, which Laura Cadman totally understood. Her grandfather Alexander had served during the Vietnam War and had told her about napalm and the effects it had on people. The sight of the Hal'Iry reminded her of those tales. "Are you okay, Nikita?" "I'm fine, but that," he swallowed. "That was hell, but," he looked down the corridor, "that's the only way we'll be able to keep them at bay, isn't it?" "I'm afraid so." "Let's get this over with then," Aronov said. The two of them began collecting grenades from the Hal'Iry remains. Tilda, this is not going to be pretty, Tilda. Soon, the Hal'Iry found themselves at the receiving end of their own grenades. Destiny Control Interface Room 02.2, 7.2020, 1026. Nicholas Rush was working his console. Colonel Young had come up with an idea to deal with the Hal'Iry, which Rush had calculated had a 50-50 chance of working. Tilda, better than our current chances of winning this firefight. Tilda, while Young was leading the defense of the gate room, Rush and Ali were preparing to execute Young's plan. Rush looked at the countdown clock. Tilda, 5 minutes. Tilda, he looked at Ali, who was working at one of the other console. "Yeah, impossible deadline, entire ship on the line," Rush said. "What else is new?" Ali said. "And if you think Spira was any different, forget it," Vale said as he walked in. "Powley has been moved from the gate room to one of the corridors. As soon as we finish burning the residue out of the local corridors, we'll be facing another wave." He paused. "So, how are we doing here?" "We're almost done with the preparations, but our chances are 50-50, Illy said. "That's presuming the bad guys don't overwhelm us before the countdown clock hits 0. "I'll go see about that," Vale said. Vale left the room while Illy and Rush turned back to their consoles. Illy just hoped that the colonels would be able to keep the Hal'Iry at bay long enough for them to finish. Tilda, or else, this is going to get very ugly. Tilda. Destiny Cargo Bay 22, 02.2, 7.2020, 1026. La 27 was getting reports that the Kazinro were striking back. They had used the Markroman 3 grenades against his troops, which had resulted in the entire wave he had sent to retake the ring room being wiped out. Oddly enough, the enemy had not made a push for the bridge. Tilda, what are they up to? Tilda, before he could ponder it further, more reports came in. So far, the enemy had used their control of the ship to lock doors and limit both their movements and speed. But now, they were opening the airlocks and decompressing sections of Prime. Tilda, we still don't know what this ship is called. Tilda, not that it mattered. With all 3 of their warships destroyed, they either needed to retake the ring room or the ship as a whole. Or they were not going home. Tilda, of course, if the Kazinro win this fight, that won't happen either. Tilda, he grabbed his radio and activated it. FC-83H, status report. =//=, we're preparing the next wave, sir. =//=, FC-83H said. =//, they've used up all the residue and grenades, sir. They won't be able to hold this wave back, Supreme Commander. =//. Excellent, Middle Commander. He looked up at countdown display. What about the translation matrix? =//, no luck so far, sir. =//. They had been scanning the transmissions of the Kazinro, but the translation computer was refusing to lock on. Apparently, the Kazinro were apparently speaking several languages. Tilda, they probably have some translation matrix of their own, allowing them to communicate amongst themselves. Tilda, which was making their lives really hard. And then there was something else that was nagging at the back of his mind. Based on the level of technology he had seen them use, these people had clearly not built this vessel. Tilda nor the alien rings. Tilda, so why were they here? Alas, it was a question that would probably never be answered. Destiny Corridor 02.2, 7.2020, 1030. Vale had overseen the relocation of the defense teams. They had moved their positions forward where they could, with 2 positions having been reinforced with Maggie and Powley. Tilda, of course, that will only do us good until they run out of ammo. Tilda now, they were placing grenades and claymore mines with tripwires. But Vale knew that the Hal'Iry were no fools. They would start checking for the mines soon, and the mines were doing damage to the corridors. Tilda, none of which will matter if we loose this ship. Tilda, then, he spotted another wave of Hal'Iry troopers. Seconds later, his radio activated and the voice of Dr. Nicholas Rush came over the air. //= 20 seconds until FTL jump. // Tilda, now or never. Tilda Vale looked cover behind a crate and waited for the clock to hit 0. If Colonel Young's idea worked, this was going to be a far from normal jump into faster than light. 26 Battle, Part 2. Destiny Maintenance Space 01.2 2.2020 09 5. Amanda Perry, Lisa Park, and Matthew Scott were in spacesuits. The maintenance space they were in could only be reached by walking along the outer hull. Park and Perry were working on the machinery inside, while Scott was closing the door. He finished and worked a small control panel next to the door. There was a hiss as the room was pressurized with standard issue atmosphere. Tilda better. Tilda Perry was the first to finish taking off her spacesuit. "Amazing," she said. "So, what exactly does all this do?" Scott asked, having just taken off his helmet. "We believe these are neutrino generators," Park began. "It's a subsystem of the FTL drive. Destiny needs them to generate a stable field." "Aren't there neutrinos in space?" Scott paused when Perry gave him a surprised look. "What? I pay attention when you discuss things." This made Perry smile. "So can't Destiny use those particles?" "No, those particles are limited to the speed of light," Perry said. "When the ship goes into faster than light, the particles are left behind and the ship has no method of collecting them." "What about the neutrinos inside the ship when it goes to FTL?" "Those leak out," Park said. "Think of Destiny as a positive pressure chamber, and the neutrinos are the air." "So the neutrinos can flow out, but because of the speed difference they can't flow in," Scott said. "Which means that the ship needs a stable source of freshly made neutrinos. Hence," he gestured to the machinery and paused. "I can't believe I just said that. I've been spending way too much time with Rush and Hal'Iry." Park and Perry burst into laughter as they began examining the equipment. Destiny Corridor 02.2, 7.2020, 1031. Destiny jumped into faster than light. As Colonel Vale had suspected, it was indeed a far from normal jump. Young's question to Rush had been simple. "Tilda, can we weaponize the FTL jump?" Tilda, and that had given Rush and Hal'Iry an idea. It was common knowledge that Destiny's FTL drive had 2 general modes. Mode number 1 was the slow, in-galaxy mode, and mode number 2 was the faster galaxy hopping one. What they had learned from Park and Perry's study of the neutrino generators was that mode number 2 needed more neutrinos than mode 1. So the generators had a low and a high setting to deal with that. Rush's idea had been simple. He had overridden the safeties and switched the neutrinos generators to high. Which, because the FTL drive was set to mode 1, meant that there were a lot more particles than needed for the engines. This was not dangerous, because neutrinos were harmless unless you made the mistake of being near a supernova when it blew up. However, When the neutrinos left FTL drive field, they created radiation that would be harmful. Would being the operative word, because the designers of the FTL drive had done their homework and installed a network of converters that turned this radiation into harmless particles. But Rush had turned certain of those converters off, and the result was both simple and deadly. Sons of Dis, Vale thought as he saw said effect. The section in front of him had just been flooded with radiation, killing the Hal'Iry troopers in less than 15 seconds. In furnace. The radiation that the neutrinos created was the same stuff that Spira's Mark II FTL drive gave off. Vale figured that this was, somehow, where the research and development on that engine had started. But that's something for us to figure out later. He grabbed his radio. Rush, it worked, he said. Start turning the converters back on. //equals, I'm working on it, Colonel. //equals, Rush said. //equals, but it will take time. //equals. //equals, there are a lot of safeties. //equals, Illy added. //equals, we barely managed to turn the ones we needed off in time. //equals. Yeah, I can understand why. This radiation is nasty. Which was probably why the ancients had simply shielded the engines aboard Spira instead of installing converters to protect the crew. If the converters had failed, the result would have been bad. Take your time. Vale out. Of course, it was only a matter of time before the Hal'Iry send in the next wave. Time to make a move for the bridge. He activated his radio and contacted Young to come up with a plan. Destiny Cargo Bay 22, 02.2, 7.2020, 1035. Things had gone to pieces. Not only had the ship gone to faster than light speed, the Kazinro had wiped out another wave of attackers. And now they were making a push towards the bridge, while cutting off all the approaches that the reinforcements could use. The corridors are blocked by these high radiation zones, and the elevators are locked in position. He had ordered teams to find maintenance tubes to get his forces to the right decks. But the hatches were locked. Blast. It was at this moment that filler first-grade Zoe 12N came in. He was looking considerably worse for wear, having been shot by Kazinro projectile weapons and missing a chunk of his tail. Based on the wound, it had been blown off by some kind of explosive. Supreme Commander, the Kazinro are assaulting our front line. He paused to collect his breath. And they are not just using their own weapons. They've stripped the dead and are using our own technology against us. What about the residue and the radiation? They're igniting the residue, but they're not using the radiation, sir. Zoe 12N paused. Still, they really want this ship back, Commander. We outnumber them, but they don't seem to care, sir. If they want this ship back so bad, let's give it to them. Lad 27 said as an idea formed in his head. Spread the word to break out the HYE 12 units, filler. We're implementing Plan Delta Omega 7. Now go. Yes, Supreme Commander. The filler left to execute his orders. La 27 knew the details for Plan Delta Omega 7 from memory, and he knew that there was a fair chance that this would be his final move. It will either work or it will blow up in our faces. But he had no intention of going down without a fight. Destiny Corridor 02.2, 7.2020, 1041. NR-1 was headed for the bridge, with NR-3 as backup. The other 3 NR teams were holding the line, with Jennifer Haley in command. They'll be fine. Vale thought as he led the team down the corridor. He and Cadman were in the lead, while G-Yal and T-Zalo covered the rear. The rest of the 2 teams were in the middle. So, how are we going to get up there? Cadman asked. The maintenance tubes, Vale began. If we try the elevator, we'll be sitting ducks. So far, they had shot their way through one Hal'Iry position, and there were 4 more between them and their target. But because they had superior knowledge of Destiny and her layout, Vale and his people had an edge. They reached the second position, where a high-ranking officer was leading the defenders. Tilda, at least if the markings on his uniform are a fair indication. Tilda, the first position, had been manned by regular troopers. Vale gave hand signals, and the two teams took up strategic positions. Fire! The team cut loose, taking down half the Hal'Iry force before they began returning fire. Cadman threw 2 grenades, which took out 2 more Hal'Iry troopers. The blast also gave Porter a shot at a third soldier, so she fired her weapon and he went down. While she reloaded, Ji-Yal and Tizalo cut loose. Their targets ducked for cover, but this put them in White's crosshairs. The South African soldier made quick work of them. The only survivor, the officer, bolted. Vale's signal and the team moved forward. Tilda 2 down, 3 to go. Tilda, and with the element of surprise gone, it was a safe bet that the next one was going to be harder. Destiny Corridor 0, 2.2, 7.2020, 1041. While Vale was leading the push towards the bridge, Young was leading another assault. They had just cleared the route to the infirmary, so TJ was overseeing the transfer of the wounded there. That done, Young was now going on the offensive against the main Hal'Iry force. He was in the lead, with Lieutenant James and Scott. Greer had been really unhappy that the colonel was doing this without him, but TJ had sedated him so that he couldn't do anything stupid. Tilda, one of the perks, on being chief medical officer. Tilda, she had said to Young as the master sergeant had passed out. But none of that did Young any good, as he gave hand signals to his team. They were in a running firefight with the Hal'Iry, who appeared to be retreating towards the lower decks of the ship. "What are they up to?" James asked. "I don't know," Scott said, "but they are definitely up to something." As he shot another Hal'Iry soldier, Young agreed with Scott's assessment of the situation. These people had come too far and fought too hard to just turn tail, he moaned inwardly at the pun, and run away. He grabbed his radio and activated it. "Rush, anything on the internal sensors." // no, Colonel. // Rush said. // no radiation, no pressure difference, and no toxins. // Keep scanning, Young out. He put his radio back on his belt and turned the next corner. That was when he spotted it. An metal ball about the size of a soccer ball. It was attached to the bulkhead by means of a magnet. Young slowly approached the device, but it did not explode. He studied it and realized that it was a thermobaric bomb. Tilda, bloody hell. Tilda, he grabbed his radio again. They needed a plan to deal with these things, and they needed it now, or this was not going to end well. Destiny Corridor 0, 2.2, 7.2020, 1052. FC-83H had barely survived his encounter with the Kazinro at the 4th fortification. Since then, the enemy had made their way through 2 more fortifications, which meant that FC-83H and his troops were the last barrier between the enemy and the bridge. He gave the orders to prepare for the attack they all knew was coming. That done, he took his position and readied his weapon. On the other end of this confrontation, Varro and Jin had joined Colonel Vale's force. And they were not alone, having led a team of 12 people to this position. That was the good news. The bad news was that Varro's group had encountered a sizable Hal'Iry force in one of the cargo bays. They had won the fight, but were now low on ammo. As was Vale's group, which was a problem because they were facing 40 Hal'Iry troopers. "What about the residue?" Varro asked. "They already burned it away," Vale said, "and the converter trick would take too long. Sound like we're doing this the old-fashioned way." "Yes," Vale said with nod. He removed the clip from the MP5 he had been using and dropped the weapon. Then he handed the clip to Varro so that he would have extra bullets for this fight. That done, he gave his Beretta 92F to Jin. Tilda the real, old-fashioned way, Tilda having dropped his projectile weapons, he unsheathed his gladius. Tilda one last fight, old girl. Tilda he gave a hand signal, and the Battle of the Bridge began with a salvo of gunfire. Destiny Cargo Bay on lowest deck 02.2, 7.2020, 11:15. All 16 high-yield explosives the model they had was the Mark 12 had been placed. The units were fitting with chameleon circuits that would keep them hidden. Once the enemy was in place, they would detonate the bombs and wipe them all out. Of course, they didn't need to draw all of them in. Tilda just enough to tip the balance. Tilda. Lad 27 grabbed his radio and asked the lookouts for reports. They told him that the plan was working. It was costing him dozens of people, but the Kazinro soldiers were walking into their trap. Tilda speaking of sacrifices, Tilda he changed the settings and tried to contact FC-83H, who was leading the defense of the bridge. All he got was static. That was when Zo 12N approached him. "The transmitter is set up, Supreme Commander," he said. "All we need is your order, sir." "Very well, filler." Lad 27 made his way to the transmitter that controlled the bombs. He entered his clearance code and smiled as the device accepted it. He ordered his lookouts to retreat. Then he pressed the big red button and ended the battle for Prime. USS Prometheus Bridge 02.2, 7.2020, 11:18. Robert Mackenzie watched in horror as the Hal'Iry thermobaric bombs exploded. Then he watched as the dots that represented life signs aboard Destiny began to blink out. They vanished in lumps as the bombs did their horrible work. It took a couple of deep breaths before he remembered that these were Hal'Iry soldiers, not their own people being vaporized. Tilda thank heaven for complaining New Assurans, Tilda. Because when the New Assurans had been given 2 weeks to upgrade Destiny, their first complaint had been that the ship lacked teleporters. "Tilda, how can you have a starship without teleporters?" Tilda Klaus had complained. Tilda even Enterprise NX-01 had a teleporter. True, it was cruel and everybody was terrified of it. But still, Tilda so the first thing they had installed was Asgard beaming technology. And it was this technology that had carried the day. The reason the bombs had been visible was because leptons were rare. So the Hal'Iry had not made their technology lepton-proof. And when the Hal'Iry had activated the devices, their chameleon circuits had short-circuited after a couple of seconds. That was why Colonel Young had found the first bomb. Rush had then used the internal sensors to locate them all. Then, at the last second, they had been beamed into the Hal'Iry's location, which had been the end of the main Hal'Iry force. But there was the issue of retaking the bridge. Tilda over to you, Mark. Tilda now, they had to wait for the outcome to come through. Destiny Bridge 02.2, 7.2020, 11:20. The Hal'Iry officer was dead. Really, really dead. They had managed to take out a considerable chunk of the Hal'Iry forces before they had run out of ammo and grenades. At the same time, Vale had cut through several enemy troopers with his sword, which Varro had thought was really impressive. The officer had been the last to go down. He had fought Vale with a pipe, but the former Centurion had ended up on top. Then a massive explosion had ripped through the ship as the thermobaric bombs had exploded. Vale's team had just finished restoring the bridge to normal. The explosion had done major damage to underside of Destiny. Tilda, this is going to take forever to repair, Tilda Vale thought. Then he grabbed his radio to tell Colonel Young that the battle for Destiny was over. 27 Cleanup and crossings. H9X 995 field near the Stargate, 03.0 7.2020, 12:03. H9X 995 was a small, barren world that was located at the very edge of Galaxy Destiny 3. It was also the final resting place of those lost in Battle of Destiny. 47 of the crew had died in the conflict. There had also been 33 wounded. Several minutes after the battle had ended, a friendly starship had arrived. called the colony's Hope. It had been built by the same group that had built the detection grid that had helped win the battle. The colony's Hope and two of her sister ships had towed Destiny to this planet at the edge of the galaxy in a matter of minutes. On her own power, it would have taken them 9 days in FTL to get there. Thanks to the assist, Destiny had thus been granted 9 days to conduct repairs. But first, they had lain the dead to their rest. As for the Hal'Iry dead, they had been cremated and the ashes scattered into space. The free colonies loathed the Hal'Iry, but they knew a thing or two about their customs, and this was how the Hal'Iry had dealt with their dead for centuries. At the moment, however, it was their own dead who were on Colonel Young's mind. He was standing at the edge of the small graveyard that was housing them. "Colonel," a female voice cut through his thoughts, "are you okay?" He turned to see Chloe Armstrong standing there. There was a worried look on her face. "I'm fine, Chloe." "No, you're not." This got her an ironic smirk from Young. He was remembering a conversation between himself and Chloe on their first day aboard Destiny. It had been just after her father, Senator Alan Armstrong, had sacrificed himself to save the rest of the expedition. Young took a deep breath and turned away from the graveyard. "So, what brought you here?" Colonel Haley just radioed in. "The new crew has just arrived." The new crew members had arrived from Earth and Freedom Prime. "And the diagnostics have just been completed. All the repairs are fully functional." "Good." The two of them walked towards one of Destiny's shuttles. Because Destiny was in orbit, using the Stargate had not been an option. So they had been using the shuttle to travel down to the planet. This trip had been to collect water from one of the few lakes on the planet. Young had also wanted to make sure that the graveyard was secure. The free colonies had built a stone wall around the graveyard, while a force field controlled by an artificial intelligence protected the only archway in or out. If it detected a Hal'Iry, it would block access and fire several hidden weapons. Young gave the graveyard one last look, then stepped into the shuttle. 8th Fleet Headquarters Supreme Commander's Office, 03.0, 7.2020, 1300. Supreme Commander La 27B walked into the office that had previously belonged to his brother. He sat down behind his new desk and leaned back in the chair. Until yesterday, he had been the middle commander of the warship Talion. Then the leadership had contacted him and informed him about his promotion. Arrogant fools. He had ordered his ship to fleet headquarters, where he would take command of the fleet, and they would pick up their new middle commander. Of course, "I still have to choose," said middle commander. But that would have to wait until the new supreme commander was caught up on all the fleet's paperwork. Especially since the Talion's crew has deserved a couple of days of shore leave. Even when he'd been a mere starship commander, La 27B had enough connections to have learned that the Kazinro had massacred his brother and his people before escaping the galaxy. But that was not the official reading. The record said that his brother was a hero who had sacrificed himself and his troops to destroy the Kazinro. As far as the people of the Hal'Iry hive knew, all 3 Kazinro vessels had been destroyed in the offensive. Enough. It was time for things to change. He activated his communications unit and began making calls. Destiny Bridge 03.1 9.2020, 1612. Destiny was 12 days into a 15-day crossing. The previous shift had just been relieved. Matthew Scott was manning the helm console, while Dale Volker was monitoring the sensors at the left console, and Ronald Greer was at the middle console. Illy was at the left aft console, and Varro was at the right aft console. The final member of the bridge crew was Nicholas Rush, who was sitting in the command chair. He and Volker were studying a stream of data from Destiny's AI. "Are you seeing what I'm seeing?" Volker said. "Yeah, it's more of the same," Rush said. 2 days into the crossing between Galaxy Destiny 3 and Galaxy Destiny 4, The ship's AI had begun generating some kind of data stream. The problem was they had no idea what said stream was about. Destiny is doing some kind of math. Rush thought. The question is on what? Which was what Rush and the other scientists had been trying to figure out for the past 10 days. He was reading one of the displays when Colonel Young came in. Any progress? No, Rush said. We're still stuck. He paused. How are things going down in the control interface room? Also stuck, Young said. Samuel Wallace, Amanda Perry, and Jin were using the control interface room to work on the data stream. Before going to the bridge, Young had checked in with them. Young gave Rush a nod and then walked out. He could breathe down Rush's neck, but that would not do any good. So he would find another way to pass the time. J2A002 field, 03.2, 2.2020, 0932. J2A002 was a planet as the very edge of Galaxy Destiny 4. It was here that they had found the answer to a very important question. During the crossing, Illy and Amanda Perry had been studying the data they had gathered on the Hal'Iry warship. And their studies had concluded the Hal'Iry hyperdrives were good enough for them to cross to Galaxy Destiny 4, which had raised questions like, had they made the crossing? And if not, why? As they had approached the planet, they had detected the wreckage of several Hal'Iry vessels. And once they had traveled to the planet, they had found out by who. The planet was home to a Zavaris obelisk, so Colonel Young had sent the archaeological team to examine the place in more detail. Which was exactly that they were doing. You know, these are really impressive, Sinara began, but they are also really annoying. Yeah, it's like slamming your head against a wall, Chloe Armstrong said. The instruments were not really telling them much. What else is new? Chloe thought. While she and Sinara were working on one side, Nikita Aronov and Alec Carlson were studying the obelisk on the other. Unfortunately, they were having even less luck than Sinara and Chloe. Aronov was looking at one of their scanners, but it was totally blank. The scanner is not helping, Aronov said. Something destroyed those ships, but if there are weapons inside this obelisk. Then we're not seeing them, Carlson began. And we still can't read this text, so that's not helping either. Then the Stargate lit up, and the ship dialed in. Carlson's radio came on, and Colonel Young ordered the team back to Destiny. He checked his watch and realized that they only had 30 minutes before the ship jumped back into FTL. The team collected their equipment, then headed back to the ship. As soon as the wormhole disconnected, a silver cylinder appeared. It ran a scan of the area around the obelisk. It transmitted a data burst, then vanished in a burst of white light. Destiny Nicholas Rush Quarters 12.18.2020, 0750. Nicholas Rush was shaving his beard. Several years ago, the power source at the beta site had been down to 8 uses. The original plan had been to use it only once a month. But Chaser and Spira had found enough supplies for that to be unnecessary. So the plan had been changed for them to receive supplies every couple of months. The first shipment had arrived just after had left J2A002. Ship number 2 had come in June 2020, and the last one had come yesterday. That shipment had included a supply of razors, both the old-fashioned kind and several electric. Cleaning up, Amanda Perry asked. The two of them had been living together for months now, and they were not the only ones to have moved in with one another. Illy Wallace and Jin were now also living together, as were Lieutenant Vanessa James and Varro. Rush finished shaving and turned to Perry. New galaxy, new look, he said, referring the fact that he had also gotten a haircut. And Rush was not the only one. Amongst the replacement crew that had arrived after the Battle of Destiny had been Petty Officer, 2nd Class Walter Quinn. Before he had been selected for the Stargate program, he had served aboard an U.S. Navy aircraft carrier as a retail services specialist. which was the formal way of saying that he was the ship's barber. Quinn had set up a barber shop on board Destiny, even recruiting a small team and begun giving the entire crew haircuts. "I like it," Perry began, "but you have to go, we're leaving this galaxy soon." The two of them kissed, and then Rush headed for the bridge. When Perry had said that they were leaving this galaxy soon, she had not been hyperbolic. Galaxy Destiny 4 had been smaller than Galaxy Destiny 3. When he reached the bridge, they were 15 minutes from leaving the galaxy. Colonel Young was in the command chair, Matthew Scott was piloting the ship, while Aronov was manning the sensors and Camille Ray was at the middle station. Samuel Wallace was at the left aft station, and the right aft station was empty. Rush sat down at this station and got to work. Destiny was still generating the data stream that she had begun working on during the previous crossing. During their journey across this galaxy, Rush and Aronov had developed a simple theory. Destiny was approaching the end of her mission. Before they had gone into stasis, Rush had been worried that because they were skipping a chunk of galaxy, they might miss some vital clue, which would prevent them from completing their mission. Everybody aboard knew that countless years ago, the ancients Akka Destiny's builders had discovered a pattern in the cosmic background radiation. A pattern that the laws of physics said couldn't be there. After thousands of years of research and debated, the ancients had come to the conclusion that they simply didn't have enough information to solve this puzzle. So they had built Destiny to travel the universe, collect more information, and solve the mystery. Tilda, and now she's putting the pieces together. Tilda, as for Rush's concern, Spira had traveled through the area that Destiny had skipped, so that had become a non-issue. He was scanning through the data stream when Scott spoke up. "We are now leaving the galaxy, sir." "Good," Young said. "Time to Destiny 5. 15 days, Colonel." "Excellent," Young began, while taking out his radio. "Young to Aronov, we have left the galaxy on schedule. How are we doing on that final report the President wanted?" ///, I just finished double-checking it. It's ready to transmit. // Aronov began. // I'll be heading over by means of the ancient stones to deal with any question, sir. // Good, Young out. Young turned his radio off as Rush went back to working on the data stream. With Galaxy Destiny 4 now behind them, he now had 15 days to work on whatever Destiny was trying to put together. Earth, Washington, D.C. White House, Oval Office 12.18.2020, 13:05. President Robert Mackenzie sat down behind his desk. He had just finished his lunch, before which he had finished his final brief on the Stargate program. By the time Destiny completed her crossing, he would already be in the process of transferring power to a new president. Robert Mackenzie had served his 2 terms, so he could not run for another term. The new president was Vincent Zachary Quinn. Unlike the man he was replacing, Quinn had not served in the military. Instead, he had begun as a low-level clerk and had worked his way up the ranks of the bureaucracy. Then in 1997, at age 37, he had accidentally rolled into politics, and now at age of 60, he was at the top. "Tilda, good luck, Mr. Quinn, Tilda." Leaning back in his chair, President Mackenzie picked up the hard copy of his last report. During their journey across Galaxy Destiny 4, the crew of Destiny had discovered a lot of Zavara structures. While they had learned very little about the inner workings of the obelisks, they had learned that Eden and Sector 3325 were on the outer edge of Zavara space. Tilda well, technically space visited by the Zavaris. Tilda Dr. Aronov and his people had done his best to discover a pattern in the placement of the obelisks, but had failed to discover one. Tilda, other than that, they were oases in a pretty harsh galaxy. Tilda, the planets with obelisks appeared to have been terraformed to some form, which made sense to Mackenzie. They had probably figured out how to build planets in Sector 3325. but building Eden would require more than just the skills to build it. The planet would have to be habitable as well, and that was where the terraforming came in. As for signs of other aliens' races, there had been none. Galaxy Destiny 4 had a blank canvas for the Zavaris to use for their experiments. And then, there was the question the data stream that Destiny was working on. Tilda talk about crappy timing. Tilda they had finally gotten Colonel Young and his crew back on board Destiny, set up a supply line to the ship, and were now making progress on the mission. If there had been more time, he would have also handed out several long-overdue promotions. As things were now, all he could do was leave a list of names on his desk and hope that Quinn would follow his recommendations. 28 Galaxy Destiny 5. Destiny Mess Hall 01.0 2.2021 1208. Destiny was now in Galaxy Destiny 5. The archaeological team was still hammering away at the mystery of the Zavaris. Alas, they had been making very little progress, and the planet builders themselves had remained out of view. Chloe Armstrong, Sinara, and Nikita Aronov were the archaeologists, with Alec Carlson being the team's engineering expert. Also on the team were Jennifer Haley and Nicholas Rush, who served as science advisors. Finally, T. Zalo was the team pilot and Ronald Greer was in charge of team security. All 8 of them were gathered in the mess hall as they planned their next set of missions. "How are things going on the translation program?" Chloe asked. "We don't have enough information to work with," Haley began. "If we had ever heard anybody speak this language, we could pull a page from Star Trek's book and go universal translator. Problem is, the Zavaris have been ignoring our signals," Rush said. During their passage through Destiny 4, they had attempted to contact the Zavaris 8 times. And each time, they had not gotten a reply from the mysteriously planet builders. Before the conversation could continue, Rush's radio came to life and Volker made a report. When they were done talking, Rush turned to the others. "We have to go to the lab," he said. "There's been a development." The team made their way to the research lab, which was the archaeological team's base. Rush made his way to one of the consoles and hit several buttons. The data stream appeared, but it was different than it had been before. Tilda, it's not really a stream anymore. Tilda, instead, it was a series of data blocks. The cosmic microwave background radiation signal appeared on a section of the screen. "Destiny is putting the pieces together," Haley said. "Already?" Chloe asked. "No offense, but it's only been a couple of years since we came aboard, and the universe is huge." "She's got a point," Sinara added. "Even if you take into consideration all the years before the Battle of Icarus Base, Destiny has only covered a tiny fraction of the universe. Is it me, or is we missing something?" "They're not wrong, Doctor," Haley said, while looking at Rush. "You're right about that," Rush said, after which there was a pause. "What if we are looking at one mystery instead of 2? "You think that the Zavaris are somehow connected to the CMBR signal?" Aronov asked. "It's a possibility," Rush said. "Then let's go over what we already have," Sinara said. Eli and Sinara manned 2 other consoles, and the team got to work. Greer and T. Zalo exchanged looks and walked out of the room. Since they were not scientists, there wasn't much for them to add, and it was pretty clear that the team was not going off-world for the foreseeable future. Greer went to the garden to spend some time with Lisa Park, while T. Zalo headed for the bridge to report. When he got there, he found Colonel Vale in the command chair. Much to his surprise, Colonel Young was behind the flight controls. Dr. Dale Volker was the scientist on duty, and Sergeant Barnes was at the middle console. The aft consoles were empty. "Doing some driving, sir." "Yes," Young began. "So what are our resident eggheads up to?" "They're going over their notes so far," T. Zalo said. "The latest theory is that CMBR signal and the Zavaris are somehow connected, but the details are vague, so it will probably be a while before we get a report." Okay, in the meantime, we're sending a team to collect supplies on J2X-107, Young said. I want you to be on it. Yes, sir. Tizalo gave the colonel a nod and headed for the gate room. Destiny Observation Lounge 01.2, 1.2021, 1328. It had been several weeks since work had begun on what Destiny's crew were now calling Project Z2. Alas, this new approach had not broken open the mysteries she was supposed to solve yet. Nicholas Rush was in Observation Lounge, taking a break from the research. As he leaned on the railing, Colonel Vale came in. Colonel Vale, Rush began. I was expecting Colonel Young. Colonel Young has his hands full helping Mr. Woolsey, General O'Neill, and Colonel Mitchell, Vale said as he joined Rush at the railing. President Quinn was inaugurated yesterday, as is tradition. So now he's getting this briefing on the program, and he's kind of freaking out, he paused. One of the perks of being second in command, and not the big cheese, is that I don't have to attend said briefing. Not a fan of politicians. I was born in the Roman Empire. What do you think? Good point, Rush said. So, how are things going with Project Z2? We are still stuck, Rush looked at him. Unless you have some kind of magic solution. Don't look at me, I'm just a soldier from another time, he paused. I've read the briefing on the signal, but it's all Chinese to me. The saying is Greek. You're forgetting that I can read Greek, Rush smiled at that. Tilda, of course he can, probably the ancient and current-day version, Tilda the Scottish doctor thought. And Latin. It was at this point that Vale could see that there was some kind of idea forming in Rush's head. Doctor, why does it look like you have an idea? Because I have an idea, and I need your help, Rush said. Okay, let's hear it. Rush nodded and explained what he was thinking. As the Scottish doctor spoke, Vale got the impression that not only was the doctor thinking outside the box. Tilda, we have clearly reached the desperate state. Tilda, but since he didn't have any better ideas, he didn't object and set to helping Rush with his plan. Destiny Mess Hall 01.2, 2.2021, 0930. The mess hall was full. So far, the scientists had been working on the CMBR signal, but they had not been making much progress. So Rush had decided to have the military personnel and aliens take a crack at it. Tilda, because maybe they can see something that the scientists have been missing. Tilda Vale thought as he entered the mess hall. Tilda and humans have their own ways of seeing the universe. But if this is truly a universal puzzle, it might require views from more than one place in the universe. Tilda, so maybe Rush's idea was not as desperate as Vale had thought it was at first. So, any ideas, Corporal Barnes? No, sir, Barnes said. Vale was sitting between Barnes and Varro, who was looking at the representation of the CMBR signal. It was still just static, despite Destiny's attempt to fill in more of the pieces. The look on his face made it clear that he was not having any ideas either. Vale had read the briefing on the signal before coming here. Across from him, Ji Yao was also looking at the readings. Okay, somebody sends out a signal at the start of the universe, he began. But it spread all over these frequencies and carved into the CMBR, and every frequency had a certain range, basically, a sphere in space. Right, the higher the frequency, the bigger the sphere, Vale said. And only the highest frequencies made it to ancient space to be detected, which is why the ancients couldn't figure it out, and they billed Destiny to gather more of the frequencies and figure it out. So now we have the basic premise. The thing is, Varro began, Chloe and Sinara made a good point. Relatively speaking, we've only covered a fraction of the universe. He paused. I can't believe I just said that. You've been hanging around with Ellie too long, Barnes said, which got her a chuckle from everybody at the table. But, seriously, what is our next move? Well, Vale said, at first he was about to say that he didn't know, but then he had an idea. No, could it be that simple? Colonel, Barnes said, we've been presuming that the signal source, whatever it is, has been stationary, Vale said. What if while Destiny has been moving to the signal source, the source has been moving towards Destiny? How would that affect the math? A lot, G.L. began. You don't have to be a math genius to figure that out. It's going to change the math a lot. And if the source is still transmitting, then Destiny would receive a lot of pieces of the puzzle at once, which is exactly what has been happening. That is why the data stream began. That is why it has been changing. Okay, Vale said. We have a theory, so what can we do to prove it? Let's start by having Illy and Rush take a close look at the math, Varro said. And then take it from there, Vale said. Varro, shall we? Varro nodded yes. G.L., keep things going here while we're out. The more ideas we can generate, the better. Tilda, just in case it's not that easy. Tilda, and remember, there are no stupid ideas in this whole situation. We need all the options we can get, even the ones that don't pan out. Yes, sir, G.L. said. Varro and Vale got up, headed out, just as Camille Ray and Matthew Scott came in. They had been on the bridge helping Adam Brody with a diagnostic on the shuttles, which was why they were late. The other tables were full, with the crew members busy discussing ideas, drawing out schematics, and doing calculations. So Ray and Scott sat down where Vale and Varro had been. I thought you two weren't coming, G.L. said. I wasn't planning to, Scott said. The colonel made it an order, Ray added. So, have you brewed up any ideas yet? Well, Barnes began, before explaining Vale and Varro's theory. So, that's what we have so far. Sounds good to me, Scott said. Tilda, but it can't be that simple, can it? Tilda, but then again, wasn't that the whole point of this Hail Mary of a meeting? As they others continued talking, he noticed that Ray was working on something in her head. Tilda, only one way to find out. Tilda, he leaned closer to him. Camille. Sorry, I was thinking about something, Ray said. Which was, G.L. said. I've been reading Stargate Command and Atlantis mission reports to pass the time during the crossings, Ray said. And there's something ticking in the back of my brain. I just can't remember which exact report. Hang on, G.L. reached under the table and grabbed a backpack, from which he took a laptop. He opened the laptop and turned it to face Ray. Maybe the logs will jog your memory. It's worth a try, Scott said. Ray logged in and found the file access logs. Once a week, Stargate Command and Atlantis transmitted their latest report to Destiny, Spira, Chaser, and the Epsilon site. Most of the files Scott had read were new ones, but there were several older files, so they stood out. Then she spotted a small collection of files that rang a bell. I think I've found it. Ray hit several keys and the reports appeared on the screen. I was reading up on phase technology. She turned the laptop so that the others could read the screen. Of course, I'm no expert. This stuff makes my head hurt. The others browsed the files. The first file was about Daniel Jackson and a crystal skull. It also mentioned Jackson's grandfather, Nicholas Ballard, and lepton radiation. File number 2 told the tale of when Colonel Mitchell and Colonel Carter had ended up out of phase because of a device Merlin had used to make notes. It had recovered from a cave underneath Glastonbury Tor. Finally, there was the third file. This one was from the year that Jonas Quinn had been on SG-1. It was Scott who noticed that this one was different. The third one mentions life forms, Scott said. SG-1 had found a device that zapped people with a particle charge that created what then Major Samantha Carter had called a bleed-through effect. It allowed them to see creatures from an alternate dimension. There had been a bit of an incident on Earth after that, but that was not what mattered now. Instead, he asked the question on his mind. So, how come the other two don't? I don't know, G.L. said. But nobody went there, Barnes said. She's right, Scott said. And the device from the SG-1 report was ancient, just like the Glastonbury Tor device. G.L. began. Illy once told me that the universe is made out 11 dimensions, like layers. He paused. So let's presume we're in the outer layer, which would be number 11, and that these 3 dimensions are each one of the other 10. Makes sense, because if Merlin knew about the bleed-through device, Barnes said, then he would have deliberately picked one of the empty dimensions, Ray said. All of which is pretty funky, Scott said, but it doesn't help us with the signal. Maybe we're asking the wrong question, GL said. There's life in this one dimension, so how did it get there? Maybe that is the connection to the signal, Ray said. An idea formed in her head. She grabbed her radio and activated it to contact Rush and explain what she was thinking to him. Tilda, it's probably a long shot, but the worst that can happen is that I'm wrong. Tilda. USS Prometheus Science Lab, 02.15.2021, 0900. Illy Wallace and Jennifer Haley were using the ancient stones to visit Prometheus. There had been several useful suggestions after what was now nicknamed Operation Hail Mary, but it had taken several days to the math and research on them. In the end, however, they had found the breakthrough they had been hoping for, which was why the 2 of them were using the stones to brief Bill Lee, Rodney McKay, and Samantha Carter. Tilda, here we go, Tilda Illy thought as the 3 scientists came in. Colonel Carter, Haley said, it's good to see you again, ma'am. Colonel Haley, Carter said with a nod. So, rumor has it that you and Illy have something for us. Indeed we do, Illy said. Hi, Illy Wallace, so shall we? Well, this should at least be entertaining, McKay said, his tone sarcastic. The 3 of them sat down, while Illy picked a black marker and turned to a whiteboard he had set up earlier. Illy took a deep breath and then began explaining. Okay, so far, we've been presuming that the source of CMBR signal was, or still is, stationary. Colonel Vale suggested that maybe Destiny has been putting the pieces together so fast, so recently, is because the source has been moving towards the ship. Really, McKay said. The Roman living fossil figured this out. I'm surprised he... McKay, Carter said, her tone was really annoyed. Go ahead, Illy. We started doing the math, which wasn't lining up. McKay gave Illy a look, but said nothing. Until we combined it with a suggestion from Camille, we believe that the source has sunk for lack of a better word. Illy grabbed a folder from a nearby table. This is a mission report from SG-1. He handed the folder to Carter, who opened it and skimmed the file. I remember this mission. It was while Jonas Quinn was on the team. We believe that the life forms you saw during that incident evolved from microscopic life that hitched a ride on the signal source, Haley said. That's why the other 2 dimensions we know about don't have any. That's an awfully big leap, don't you think? McKay said. Maybe not, Lee said. We don't know that much about the dimension, but if the source settled into some kind of orbit, which is exactly what we are thinking, Illy said as he drew 2 dots on the whiteboard. So, the source is in its original position, doing its thing, then it sinks. But the waves it transmitted before doing so are still out there. Illy drew several waves between the 2 dots. Those are the ones the ancients detected, and the pieces of the puzzle Destiny has been putting together. Meanwhile, our source is seeding the dimension that is now its home, Haley said, while using a red marker to draw an ellipse with the 2 dots at the ends. And the settling into its orbit. Now, if it is still transmitting, that signal now has to punch through several dimensional barriers. That would diminish the transmission range a lot, Lee said. But if Colonel Vale is right, which the math is saying he is, now that we've compensated for the dimensional issue, Illy said. Then all we have to do is compute an interception course, Carter said. Easier said than done, McKay said. Illy grabbed a wiping block and cleared the board. Then he handed McKay, Lee, and Carter 1 folder each. These contained copies of the math they had done so far. That done, they got to work. 29 The End, Part 1. Destiny Bridge 06.2, 8.2021, 2107. There had been good news and bad news. The good news was that the team in the Prometheus Science Lab had been able to compute an intercept course of the source. The bad news had been that Destiny had been more than 4 months away. And Destiny's artificial intelligence had refused to show the signal to the expedition. But Rush had been able to access enough of the computer to know that the pieces were coming together at an accelerate rate as they approached the source. And now, after all these years, both inside and outside of stasis, they were mere minutes away from potentially finding out the destiny of all things. So it was very surprising that the bridge was fully manned. Colonel Young was in the command chair, while Rush was manning the sensors and Greer was on weapons. As for piloting, that job had been given to Matthew Scott. The right aft console was where Amanda Perry was sitting, while the two Wallaces, Ely and Samuel, had settled in at the left aft console. Colonel Young had figured that, whatever they were about to face, there would be plenty of information to analyze. So he had asked Colonel Vale to make sure that the control interface room was also manned and ready when they came out of FTL. Young took out his radio and activated it. "Young to Vale," he began. "Mark, we are 30 seconds away. Are you ready?" =/== we're ready, Everett. =/== in the last couple of months, Young and Vale had learned to get along to the point that they were now on a first-name basis. =/== Dr. Park, Mr. Brody and Mr. Volker are on the consoles. Corporal Barnes and Camille are in the gate room, just in case. =/== Good, Young out. He put his radio away and looked at the clock. They had picked a point to drop out FTL and programmed in a countdown. It hadn't been easy, but they had done it. Tilde 10 seconds, Tilde now Lieutenant Scott. "Yes, sir," Scott said. Scott pushed the proper button and Destiny dropped out of faster than light. They had dropped out between solar systems, but everybody aboard knew that the space ahead of them was far from empty. The sensors came to life and data began flowing all over the screens. Before Young could ask what they were approaching, he got an answer. But it was not from the place he was expecting. Pegasus, Atlantis Deep Space Internet Facility 06.2, 8.2021, 2108. President Vincent Z. Quinn had traveled to the Pegasus Galaxy aboard the Daedalus, and he was not alone. When he had learned that there was a good chance that the project was about to come to its conclusion, Quinn had provided Robert Mackenzie with the proper security clearance and asked him to come along. Mackenzie had accepted, but the two of them had not spent a lot of time together during the trip. While Quinn had been busy running the country over subspace transmission, Mackenzie had gone back to his Navy roots and had spent the 3 weeks getting familiar with the 304 class and its inner workings. So this was the first serious conversation the two of them were having. So Quinn began, "Hawaii." "Yes, I was done with the Virginia weather." "Rumor has it that you're going for the governorship next year," Quinn said. "Is that true?" "No, I am done." Mackenzie scratched his face. "I'm retiring and spending quality time with my daughter and grandchildren." "Good for you." Mackenzie nodded and looked at the main screen of the facility where telemetry from Destiny was coming in. He was 65 years old now, with his time in the White House having begun when he was 49. But that was not what was on his mind. When he had joined the Navy in 1972, the Vietnam War had been going on. Tilde the fall of Saigon. Tilde he had been a mere lieutenant, and all he had been able to do was watch. In the years since, he had climbed to Commander-in-Chief of the United States Armed Forces. Tilde well, former Commander-in-Chief, Tilde and still, all he could do was watch. The more things change, the more they stay the same. He leaned back and hoped that their monitoring didn't turn into a wake. Spira Bridge 06.2, 8.2021, 2108. The entire skeleton crew was watching as Destiny approached what could be the end of her journey. All the stations were manned, with Levine in the command chair and Dr. Peters running the science side of things. Spira and Chaser had rendezvoused several days after the Battle of Destiny, so the Primian vessel was visible through the windows of the bridge. Tilda quite the beauty. Tilda then Peters spoke up. "Major, we've got a problem." "What kind of problem?" Levine asked. "See for yourself." She hit several keys and one of the screen changed. It showed a white light on their course. "It's a distortion of some kind. My sensors are saying that we're heading right for it." Peters paused. "And before you ask, the controls are not responding, so we can't avoid it. We have 12 minutes until it swallows us." "Correct me if I'm wrong, but didn't we do this?" Levine said. "The whole trip to 12 BC to safe Earth thing, been there, done that." "Well, we might have to do it again." Levine hit several keys, and a countdown appeared on one of the screens. He had a feeling that whatever was waiting for them 12 minutes away, it was connected to whatever destiny was about to face. Tilda looks like the stakes have just been raised. Tilda, alas, there was nothing for them to do but wait and watch. Destiny Bridge 06.2, 8.2021, 2110. Young had left the command chair and was now looking out the window. Ahead of them, a sphere of blue light had slowly begun to fade into existence. At the same time, Destiny had begun to slow down. Now, the ship was holding its position. Tilda the end of the journey. Tilda at the same time, he was also reading an update that Spira had just sent over the DSI network. Tilda 10 minutes and counting. Tilda. Great, no pressure. He was about to grab his radio and contact Vale when there was a beep from the sensors. Tilda, now what? Tilda, he turned to Rush. What are the sensors saying? Nothing about what is ahead, Rush began. They are, however, getting readings about what is behind us. He had been hitting several keys as he had been talking. It seems, one of the screens changed to show the outline of an alien vessel, that the Zavaris had decided to step from behind the curtain. The outline on the screen was a simple delta, but the computer had managed to identify the sublight drives at the stern, which were 3 circles at the stern. Said stern was the bottom of the delta. They had also found a small dome near the bow. Tilda the classical bridge. Tilda finally, there was alien writing in the picture. Destiny could not translate the writing, but it had matched the letters with the writing on the Zavaris obelisks they had encountered. "So now what?" Scott asked. "We're getting a signal from the Zavaris vessel," Samuel Wallace said. "It looks like a translation program designed for Destiny's communication system, Colonel." "Okay," Young said. "Dr. Perry, your thoughts on that ship?" "It's advanced," Perry began. "I'd say it's about the same level as the Aurora class near the end of the war with the Wraith, but there's nothing special about it. Just standard-issue spaceship systems." "What about the locals?" "There are no readings on the Zavaris themselves," Rush said. "There's a field blocking the sensors." Before Young could push the subject further, his radio activated and Colonel Vale's voice come over the channel. It turned out that they had more problems than what they seeing on sensors. Destiny Gate Room 06.2, 8.2021, 2113. Mark Vale was not a happy camper. Just after they had dropped out of FTL, Camille Ray had reported in from the gate room. Because Vale had been much closer, he had gone to respond. When Destiny had dropped out, there had been 4 Stargates in range. But then the screen had blinked, and something had override the normal programming, locking those 4 gates out. Instead, there was something impossible on the screen. "A 9 chevron address," Vale said. "And it's not Earth. That should be impossible." He hit several keys on the console and then grabbed his radio. Tilda 6 minutes and counting. Tilda the update on Spira and Chaser had also appeared on the Kino reading console. Vale to Young. "Everett, are you seeing what I just diverted to you? Something just overrode the normal dialing program." =//= yes, we're seeing it. Equals slash back slash equals Young said. Equals slash back slash equals Rush is saying it's impossible. Equals slash back slash equals. That was my first response, but here we are. And I read the update on the 2 other ships. We're down to 5 minutes. Vale paused. We need to act fast. There are only 2 possible sources of that distortion, and my gut is telling me that going through the gate to this other 9 chevron place is the best shot we have at ruling one of them out. There was a pause as Young considered his options. Then he made his decision. Do it. Right, Vale out. He knew where everybody was, so he quickly put together a team in his head. Tilda, unfortunately, physically doing it will take a bit longer. Tilda, and then there was the question if Destiny had enough power to make the connection. But there was only one way to find out. So he activated his radio again and began collecting his team. Pegasus, Atlantis Deep Space Internet Facility, 06.2 8.2021. 2123. Never, ever in Robert Mackenzie's life had 3 minutes felt as long as now, and he had been through some humdingers. Spira and Chaser had just been swallowed by the distortion. The telemetry from both ships had died the second they entered it. Tilda, which can't be good news. Tilda and Destiny was still hard at work collecting the team they were going to send through the Stargate. Tilda, another 9 chevron address. What the? Unless, no, it can't be. Tilda, before he could ponder it further, there was beep from one of the consoles. It was being manned by Radix Zelenka. The Stargate on Destiny has activated, sirs. Excellent, Quinn said. What about the translation program? The installation is still running, Mr. President. We're at 65% and climbing. Keep an eye on it, Doctor. Mackenzie looked at the display, then looked at his watch and did the math. Taking the lag into consideration, the program was actually nearly done installing aboard Destiny. Tilda, that might be one very awkward situation. Tilda, diplomacy was hard enough between humans. Talking to aliens was even harder. So, and not for the first time, he was glad not to be the president anymore. Tilda, good luck, Colonel Young. Tilda. Destiny Bridge 06.2 8.2021. 2125. There was a beep as the translation program finished installing. Samuel Wallace hit several keys and the program opened. Next to him, Illy turned his stool around to face the command chair. The translation program is installed, he said. Good, Young began. Lieutenant, what is that ship doing? Nothing, Scott said. It's just sitting there. Its shields are down and the weapons are offline, sir, Greer said. Just chilling in deep space. Young nodded and then took out his radio. Tilda, come on, Mark. Tell me something. Tilda, he activated the radio and contacted Camille. After Vale's hastily assembled team had gone through the gate, the dialing computer had gone inert. For all intents and purposes, the gate had become useless. Which was still the situation when Camille's radio came to life. So that was exactly what she told him when he asked for an update. She heard the frustration in his voice as he closed the channel. This made Adam Brody and Dale Volker exchange looks. Vale had taken Lisa Park and Corporal Barnes with him through the Stargate, so the 2 of them had gotten the job of manning the gate room consoles. Besides Park and Barnes, Vale had also taken Corporal Vilazzo and Captain Grogan. I don't understand, Volker said as he worked the console. This should unlock the dialing program. Under normal circumstances, Brody said, but things are far from normal. So, what else is new? Great, over 200 crew and I get stuck with Statler and Waldorf, Ray said. I am not that, Brody began, before being cut off by a beep from the dialing computer, which Volker was manning. It worked. Ray joined him at the console to see that the dialing computer now displayed a list of 5 gate addresses. The impossible 9 chevron was listed above the 4 normal addresses in range. The gate is back online, he looked at Ray. And I'm running a diagnostic to see how much power we used for that dial. Camille grabbed her radio and reported the development for Colonel Young. He had left the command chair and was standing next to Amanda Perry, who had just managed to tap into the dialing computer. Once we know how much power we have used, we should be able to calculate the distance Vale's team traveled, Perry said. Good, Young said, while he suspected that he already knew where the wormhole had gone. Time to take the bull by the horns. Hal'Iry, open a channel. Right, one channel coming up. Hal'Iry reached for the proper controls, but then the world outside the windows of the bridge was broken by a flash of light. And then the world really turned upside down. 30 The End, Part 2. Galaxy Destiny 5 Between Destiny and the Blue Light, 06.2, 8.2021, 2130. 21 flashes broke the black of space. The first 19 flashes faded to reveal an ancient seed ship, but the 20th flash was different, leaving Chaser behind. And when the final flash was over, Spira, for the first time in her existence, was together with the ship she had been billed to serve as a backup for. Then another Zavaris ship dropped out of subspace. This ship, however, was different from the first Zavaris vessel to arrive. The first vessel had its marking written in blue and was about 600 meters long. Rush had also figured out that it had 22 decks. Ship number 2 had the same shape as the first arrival, but the deck count didn't make it past 15. The vessel was also only 150 meters long, and the markings were written in green. On Rush's panel, however, the computer was saying that this was not where the differences ended. While Rush and Perry were taking a closer look at the new arrivals, the sphere of blue light became brighter. Red bolts of energy danced across its surface, and then the sphere expanded. It swallowed Destiny, the Zavaris vessels, and all the other ships. Pegasus, Atlantis Deep Space Internet Facility, 06.2, 8.2021, 2133. All the telemetry screens went dark. Tilda Frack, Tilda Mackenzie thought, as he heard Dr. Zelenka gasp. He ignored the fact that the commander-in-chief was in the room and sat down behind one of the consoles. Tilda, let's see if I still have it. Tilda, he had learned how to operate the consoles during his presidency. He rewound the telemetry and began taking a closer look at the last couple seconds. Dr. Zelenka, is this saying what I think it's saying? Yes, Zelenka began. Chaser, Spira, and 19 Mark I seed ships. Only 19, Quinn asked. I thought the ancients build 24. They did, sir. But over the years, 5 vessels were destroyed, Zelenka said, and that includes the vessel where Colonel Telford made first contact with the Ursini. Zelenka checked something. The bad news is that I cannot tell if it was the Zavaris or the blue light that relocated the vessels. The good news is that I got a life signs count from both manned vessels. And, Quinn asked, both counts came back as 12. We didn't lose anybody, but we are blind and deaf. I have an idea about that, Mackenzie said. He explained what he had in mind, and they got to work. Destiny Bridge 06.2, 8.2021, 2132. The ride had been far from smooth, but Destiny had made it to, well, wherever they were now, in one piece. Rush was looking at the sensors, but the range was limited by their new locale. He could see the 2 Zavaris vessels, which both holding position next to Destiny. The rest, however, was lost because of high-energy particles that were blinding the sensors. Speaking of blinding, using their eyes to get a closer look was not an option either. The light from the bubble they were in was so bright that Destiny had retracted the bridge to protect the crew. Tell me something, Rush, Young said. I've finished my analysis of the second Zavaris vessel, Rush began as he turned his chair to face Young. You should see this. He put the scan of the smaller vessel on one of the screens. Besides the obvious differences, there is something wrong with it. The quantum signature doesn't match. The quantum what? Samuel Wallace said. Signature, Hal'Iry began. It's a sort of fingerprint. Everything in a universe has the same signature and there is no way to change it. So if you know how to detect it, it's a quick and easy way to find something that is not from this universe. Samuel paused. Which means that we're not looking at one version of the Zavaris, we're looking at two, and just as we're reaching the end of the journey. No way that is a coincidence. He's right, Perry said. What about the signal? Scott said. How does it fit in? Rush turned back to his console and checked on the CMBR signal. Destiny's AI was putting the pieces together, but was still refusing to show the content of the message. As for the Zavaris, both versions were silent. He reported both to the rest of the crew, which made Young unhappy. But he knew that yelling wouldn't get him anything. Is there any way we can get the sensors? That was as far as Young got before the Wallace's console beeped. What? We've got an incoming signal, Illy said. It's Spira. Let's hear it. Illy opened the channel. Major Levine, report. //= we're all still here, sir. Bit shaken, bit rattled, but no major injuries. //= Levine paused. //= one moment we were being swallowed the distortion and the next we were here. The range on our sensors is severely limited, but Dr. Peters and her team are working on a plan to get you some more data. //= What about your Stargate? Is it working? //= yes, sir. But there is some weird stuff going on there. //= Let me guess. You have an impossible 9 chevron address in range. //= yes, we do. And both Destiny and Chaser's Gate are on the display as well. //= Good. Stand by for further orders, Young out. The channel closed, but soon afterwards the console beeped again. On Rush's console, sections of their new location appeared. Spira's crew had networked all the other friendly ships and placed them in a pattern around Destiny, where they served as boosters for the ship's sensors. Although the network only covered a section of the place they were in, there was enough information for Rush to figure some things out. We're in a bubble of some kind, and whatever it is, the barrier is blocking all communications with the outside universe. The signal source is still outside sensor range, but I know what direction it is in. We should be able to move closer using the sublight drives. Scott, set the course. Greer, ready the weapons just in case. Illy, signal the fleet to follow. Yes, sir, Scott and Greer said in unison. One signal coming right up, Illy said. Young sat down in the command chair, and soon Destiny and her fleet headed out. Pegasus, Atlantis Deep Space Internet Facility 06.2 8.2021, 2145. Some of the displays were working again. While all the readings from the ships were still dead, they had managed to connect to the 4 Stargates that had been in range when Destiny and company had vanished. The gates couldn't tell them much, but they were still online. That's a start. Mackenzie thought. It gave them a maximum diameter for whatever had just swallowed Destiny and the other vessels. The gates were also still in the same place they had been when before the telemetry had been lost. Those Stargates are outside the area of effect, Mackenzie said. And whatever is happening, it is not distorting the local gravity to a significant. If it was, the gates would be moving, Zelenka said, which would cause them to register as offline. What about that diagnostic Dr. Volker was running? Quinn asked. Yes, Zelenka said. I can bring that up and see where Colonel Vale and his team went. Zelenka hit the proper keys, and the diagnostic came up. The wormhole had only traveled a few million kilometers, and the other end had been smack in the middle of the original anomaly. And something tells me that Colonel Young has already figured that out. Which probably meant that they were working on something already. Alas, there was nothing they could do about it, so they were back to watching and waiting. Destiny Bridge 06.2 8.2021, 2140. Destiny and company had come to a halt. Their forward progress was blocked by a wall of purple lightning flashes, but instead of going from top to bottom, these bolts were moving from left to right and vice versa. The Zavaris vessels had followed behind the fleet. But that was not what was on Young's mind. He was looking at the diagnostic Volker had run on the wormhole, which had confirmed his hunch. "So, Colonel Vale's team is on the other side of that?" Perry asked. "Yes," Young began, "and there is only way to get there." As if on cue, down in the gate room, the Stargate lit up and began rotating. Because her console was still tied into the gate room telemetry, Amanda Perry saw this, and so did Young. He waited until the Stargate finished connecting, then grabbed his radio and tried to contact Vale and his team. =/backslash=, "We're still here, =/backslash=, Vale said. =/backslash=, "And you won't believe where we are, =/backslash=, there was a pause. =/backslash=, "We're transmitting you a little something, =/backslash=. "Colonel, we have 2 incoming transmissions," Ellie said. "One through the gate and one from the big alien ship." The 3 screens facing the command chair changed. No way, Ellie thought. The screen showed the CMBR signal, but the classic screen full of static they had gotten used to was changing. The message is decoding. After all this years, Destiny was about to give up her secret. And Ellie got the feeling that this was only the beginning. Destiny Gate Room 06.2, 8.2021, 2110. Vale looked at his hastily assembled team. Carl Grogan, Lisa Park, Barnes, and Vilazzo would go with him through the gate. Meanwhile, Laura Cadman was gathering a team to secure the gate room, just in case they encountered any nasty surprises on the other end of the wormhole. The Stargate finished dialing. "Here we go, Tilda." "Grogan, you have the rear," Vale said. "Yes, sir," Grogan said. With his MP5 at the ready, Vale stepped through the puddle into another gate room. Sons of Dis. The room was empty, with the lighting being low. He turned on the spot to study the room. The design was nothing like the gate room aboard Destiny. Instead, it was round with the gate in the middle. There were 2 control consoles. Vale realized that one was the dialing computer, while the other was some version of the Kino console. Then the rest of his team came through. "It's another Destiny," Park said. "How is that possible?" "I have no idea," Vale said. "But let's go see if we can find the control interface room. It might have some of the answers." "Sounds like a plan to me," Grogan said. The team headed out. Unfortunately, it took them just under 20 minutes to find the control interface room. This new, strange Destiny was about the same size as the ship they were familiar with, but the control interface room was not located anywhere near the gate room. Instead, it was located at the very front of one of the higher decks, which was why it took them a while to find it. Park had begun working on one of the consoles, but it took her a while to find the answers they needed. "Colonel, what do you have?" "If this ship has a master code like our Destiny, it's apparently been entered," Park paused. "I can dial the Stargate from here." "What about the CMBR signal? Please, tell me that all this was not for nothing." The Ancients going through all the fuss of building a whole fleet of ships, our 2 expeditions, and building 2 off-worlds bases, not to mention all the hostiles they had dodged and fought the last couple of years. There has to be something on it. There is. It looks like some kind of password to unlock the message once it's been assembled. "Dial the gate." "Yes, Colonel." The ship, which Vale had nicknamed Destiny 1.0 in his head, dialed back to Destiny. As soon as the wormhole finished connecting, he and Young began a conversation. "We're still here, and you won't believe where we are." Vale gave Park a look, and she transmitted the password to Destiny. "We're transmitting you a little something." He did not get a reply. Instead, there was only silence. Young joined Park at her console and realized why. Tilda Lisa was right. The message is decoding. Tilda, it was a safe bet that the crew on Destiny was watching the same thing that they were. Tilda, hence the silence. Tilda, then the message finished decoding. Park hit several keys so that the message would appear on all the screens in the room. Tilda, so that the entire team can see. Good thinking there. Tilda. Here we go, Vale said. Time to see what the message is. Park pressed the play button, and the message began. Destiny Bridge 06.2, 8.2021, 2142. Ellie couldn't believe what he was looking at. On the screen was a documentary. His documentary? Sort of the details were different. The person making the recording was human. He was talking about a problem with the life support. Somebody called him Hal'Iry. It was making his head spin. Tilda and somewhere, Ronald D. Moore and the rest of the Battlestar gang are shaking their fists at the air, Tilda Ellie thought. He looked at the other people in the room. All of them were silent, trying to process this revelation. Tilda, it's a cycle. Tilda, but how had it come about? What was its goal? And how had this other, older destiny ended up at the very beginning of the universe? Instead of answering questions, the message had created a laundry list of new ones. And then Ellie remembered the hail from the Zavaris. Colonel, we're still being hailed by the Zavaris. Pause the message and open a channel. Perry paused the message while Ellie opened the channel. This Colonel Young, Commander of Destiny, we have no hostile intentions towards you. Please reply. There was tense silence as they waited for an answer. Then came what they had been hoping for. The voice that came over the channel sounded very human, but because it did not come with a picture, Young had no idea what a Zavaris looked like. Tilda, still the mysterious lot. Tilda. // this is Commander Iero of the science vessel Madumani. // the voice began. // we come in peace. Colonel Young. // Young looked at Rush's console. The Scottish scientist had translated the markings on the two Zavaris vessels. Both ships were called the Madumani. It was the larger version, the one native to this universe, that was the source of the transmission. Before Young could reply, the sensors indicated that the barrier ahead of them was fading away. They could now see the other destiny. It was a blue cylinder with a bright light at the far end. On top of the cylinder was a pyramid not unlike the one they were inside right now. But the computer was able to locate some of the features their own destiny had. Tilda, the garden, the bridge, the gate room, it's all there. Tilda, that, however, was not his top priority. He turned his attention back to the conversation with Commander Iero. Commander Iero, do you know why that ship is out there? // yes, // the commander of the Madumani began. // yes, I do. // And with that, he began telling the story of the Zavaris. The Zavaris and the Ancients, a tale of two civilizations. Thousands of years ago, a race that would be known as the Zavaris needed more habitable worlds. The reason why had not been included in story, as it had been passed down over the years. To deal with their problems, the Zavaris traveled to a distant reach of space. And there, they began constructing things. First came the asteroids, which were followed by the moons. Then they made several planets in solar systems that already existed. Some of this tale had been entered into Tory history books by Colonel Vale and his crew. Finally, 2,000 years ago, the Zavaris felt they were ready for their greatest creation. And thus, a star and the world that would one day be known as Eden was born. But dozens of universes and millions of years away, there was another version of the race known as Zavaris. Existing before their brethren, this version were not as wise or patient as their counterparts, and when they were faced with the same problem as the others, they took another approach. Instead of practicing and doing their homework, they went straight to attempting to construct Eden and her star, and it had gone wrong. Horribly wrong. Instead of creating a stable star and planet, their creation exploded in a burst of dimensional energy. Most people thought of the multiverse as a deck of cards, but the Zavaris were told that they were actually planes of glass, and the explosion had been like a bullet shot through those planes. Each plane was left with a hole, with cracks radiating outward. This damage threatened the very existence of these damaged universes and the multiverse itself. For if these universes had been lost, they would have created a void that would have consumed everything. Fortunately for the multiverse, the universe where the foolish Zavaris lived was also home to a version of the Ancients. They had detected the damage and built the first destiny ever to repair the damage. But when it reached the hole, something happened. The bulk of the crew was sent back the ancient homeworld using the Stargate, while a skeleton crew took the vessel through the hole and sealed it. But that event was so violent that it threw the ship back in time to the very beginning of the universe. There, the skeleton crew carved the first signal out in the cosmic microwave background radiation. Then, they learned to ascend and set about manipulating history to create the next destiny. As for the Zavaris who had caused the disaster, they learned how to travel between the universes and spread far and wide. They told their brethren that took them in the tail, hoping to prevent history from repeating itself. And with the cycle having been begun, the tale ended. Destiny Bridge 06.2, 8.2021, 2150. Commander Hal'Iry had finished his story and then closed the channel. Young was sitting in the command chair, pondering if he could believe the Zavaris commander. He looked at Rush, who had turned his chair to face the command chair. "I believe him," Rush began. "There's another destiny out there, another Matumani. I translated the markings on the smaller Zavaris ship. It's the same ship. And there's the message." "You mean my documentary," Illy said while frowning. "Well, sort of." "You know what this means," Young said. "To continue the cycle, we're going to have to send this ship through that hole." "With a crew," Rush said. "A crew that is not coming back." "How big a crew are we talking about here?" Scott asked. 3, maybe 4, Perry said. "Of course, that's presuming we send the rest of the crew back at the last moment. The question is, who is going to stay behind and how are we going to select them?" Instead of answering, Young took out his radio. He ordered Cadman to dial the other destiny and tell Vale to get his team back to the ship. Young knew that Perry was right. They would need to select a crew to finish the mission, Tilda, and stay behind. Tilda, while the others would go home. As for the number of crew members, he figured that Perry's estimate was right on the money. Tilda a pilot, somebody with medical training and somebody who can man the weapons console. Tilda he sat down in the command chair. "I'll ask for volunteers, then we'll hold a lottery," Young said. "Colonel," Scott said, "you should see this." The sensors showed that the bubble they were inside of was now slowly dissolving. It was only now that Young realized something they had been missing. Tilda the universe is billions of years old. So how come this destiny hasn't literally aged into dust? Tilda, so he asked exactly that question. It was Samuel Wallace who realized the answer. "The other dimension," he began. "We've been presuming that the other destiny sank into that dimension, but what if it dove into other dimension like a submarine, and then used its FTL drive to somehow slow down time?" "That is an excellent theory," Perry said. "I might be able to prove it by taking a closer look at that other ship." "He has his moments," Illy said with a smile. "I'll consider sending another team to that ship later," Young said. "There's something more important," Rush said. "At least for now. The Zavaris story mentioned a hole, which I'm presuming is some kind of rift that needs to be sealed. We need to find it." As if in on cue, there was a transmission from the Matumani. It contained a set of coordinates. Rush calculated that it would take them about a week to reach the location. He reported this, and they got to work on coming up with a plan. Destiny Observation Lounge 07.05.2021 0900. Illy leaned on the railing and looked ahead. They were in the vastness between two solar systems, yet Destiny was being touched a gently green light, the source of which was a rift about the size of the moon. It was glowing with green energy. Tilda, so, this it, we've reached the end. Tilda, they had spent the last week preparing for this moment. As Colonel Young had planned, they had asked for volunteers. There had been 67 names on the list. Corporal Tom Weber would be the pilot. Dr. Alexander Bennett was the medic, and Private First Class John White would man the weapons console. Everybody else would go to Old Destiny, which would dial Earth. During the trip here, a skeleton crew, including Amanda Perry, had manned and examined the alternate ancient vessel. They had learned two things. The first thing was that Samuel Wallace's theory had been right. She had also figured out how Destiny could recreate the dive and the time dilation effect. Normally, this kind of research would have taken decades to complete, but Old Destiny's crew had left behind all their research. All she had needed was to tweak the protocol for Destiny's FTL drive, and she had not done the work alone. Brody, Volker, Park, Rush, Carlson, and both Wallaces had been there to help her. The second thing they had discovered was that dialing Earth was not going to be as easy as they had hoped. Old Destiny was in rough shape. This meant that they would not use it to close the rift. They needed Destiny for that. Which meant that they couldn't risk using the newer vessel for dialing Earth. But if they dialed Earth using Old Destiny, it was a safe bet that the vessel would be destroyed in the process. As for the other ships, Old Destiny's condition made it impossible to connect it to any of them. "Ellie," Jin said as she came in, "it's time to go." "Yeah," Ellie said. The bulk of the crew had already relocated to Old Destiny. Besides the 3 crew members who would stay behind, there were only 6 people aboard the ship. Rush, the 2 Wallaces, Jin, Matthew Scott, and Young. Ellie took Jin's hand, and the 2 of them headed for the gate room. Samuel Wallace had refused to leave the ship without his son. Tilda, talk about irony. Tilda, as they arrived, Rush was stepping through the puddle. "Ready to go, Ellie?" he asked. "Yes." They made their way to the Stargate. After all this time, they were finally heading back to Earth. And although he would never admit it, part of him would miss this ship and the people whom had called her home. Tilda, goodbye, beautiful. Tilda, then, he and Jin stepped through the puddle, leaving only Scott and Young aboard. The colonel turned to the lieutenant. "Time to go, Lieutenant." "With all due respect, sir," Scott said. "I was the first person to set foot on this ship. I'd like to be the last one to leave it." "Okay, Mel Gibson." Young stepped through the puddle. Scott made sure that his gear was secured and his weapon was ready. Then he gave the gate room one last look. He had noticed the look on Ellie's face before he had stepped through the gate, and he knew Ellie well enough to know what he had been thinking. "Tilda, yeah, I'm going to miss her too, Tilda." "Thank you," he said, before stepping through the puddle. The wormhole disengaged, and seconds later, Destiny jumped into FTL. It was this jolt that woke Dr. Morrison. Despite Young's strict orders not to, he had gotten drunk the night before, so he had overslept. Realizing what was about to happen, he ran for the gate room, but it was already too late. Destiny flew into the rift. Space, the final frontier, not sign 07.0, 5.2021, 0905. Destiny flew into the rift. The tear in the fabric of the space-time continuum closed, and like all the times before, it sent the vessel back to the beginning of the universe that was now its home. The event was far from subtle, sending radiation and light in all directions. Finally, the light faded, and all that was left was an empty stretch of space. Then the 2 versions of the Madumani, which had been with the fleet for the entire thing, activated their hyperdrives and left. After that, flashes began to lit up space as the siege ships vanished. The last siege ship flashed out of sight, and then Chaser was taken. Spira was the last ship to vanish, leaving Old Destiny all alone. Earth Stargate Command, Control Room 07.0, 5.2021. 0910. General Hank Landry and watched as the fleet appeared in orbit of Earth. After the last flash, the Stargate lit up. General O'Neill, Richard Woolsey, and whole bundle of IOA representatives were upstairs in the briefing room. President Quinn was the only head of state present. O'Neill had not come along, having brought along Sergeant Walter Harriman. It was Harriman who was behind the controls. Incoming wormhole. Open the iris. Harriman opened the iris. Landry made his way to the gate room as the first expedition members began arriving through the event horizon. He heard Harriman call for a medical team over the PA, just in case. Seconds later, Dr. Carolyn Lamb and a team of medical personnel arrived. Tilda she was probably already preparing before Harriman made the call. Tilda finally, Colonel Young and Colonel stepped through the gate. Colonels, excellent work. Yes, sir, the two of them said in unison, which made Landry chuckle. So now what? Young asked. Well, O'Neill began as he walked in. First you'll have to shake hands with a cranky old general and some blowhard politicians. Then we'll see about a schedule of debriefs and reassignments. Who knows, Landry said. Maybe we'll even be able to sneak in a promotion or two. There's that, and we need to deal with all that information you send back. During the week it had taken to travel to the Rift, Rush and Perry had set up a data stream that had sent all of Old Destiny's logs back to Earth and Atlantis over the DSI network. It had included the logs of the 40 incarnations that had come before Old Destiny. The data would take decades, if not centuries, to unravel and study. The colonels followed the generals out of the gate room. Their mission was over. The end.